what does it actually take to hold on to power? Not just get it, but keep it. We're talking political survival here. When everything's on the line, we're going to strip away, the moral niceties and look at the cold, hard mechanics of how governance really works, or at least how one thinker saw it.
Exactly. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a text that, well, it gets praised and attacked in pretty much equal measure, doesn't it? It's presented almost as a manual for acquiring power, keeping it, and sometimes, ruthlessly defending it.
Our mission, then, is to really explore the core ideas, the central arguments, and the practical reasoning laid out in this seminal work on principalities, on how rulers rule.
We're looking at a text that deliberately tries to separate political reality, how people actually live and govern, from the moral ideal, how maybe we think they ought to live.
And why does this matter for you, the listener? Well, the framework it offers is just incredibly stark. It gives this unvarnished view of power dynamics, offering some really clear, maybe even uncomfortable insights into control, conflict, and strategy.
Yeah, we're moving beyond just like a historical summary. We want to get into the psychological and strategic thinking that Machiavelli believed was essential in the political world.
Okay, so where does he begin? It starts with this really clear-cut classification of governments.
Right off the bat, all states, all dominions, as he calls them, are basically one of two things. They're either republics or they're principalities. Simple as that, initially.
And then, the principalities immediately get split. This seems crucial for everything that follows. You've got hereditary principalities, think established royal families, long time in charge.
Yeah, the ones that have been around forever. And then the much trickier category, new principalities.
And new isn't simple either, is it?
No, it breaks down again. You have entirely new states like, say, Milan when Francesco Sforza took it over. Or you have mixed principalities. These are new territories added onto an existing state, like when Naples became part of Spain.
And how you get them matters, too.
Yeah.
By your own army, someone else's luck, skill.
Exactly. Your own arms, the arms of others, fortune, or ability or two, as he calls it. This whole setup, this taxonomy, it immediately tells you that how you rule, how hard it's going to be, depends entirely on the type of state you're dealing with.
So why spend time on these categories? It seems like he quickly gets to the point that basically old states are easier to run. Hereditary rule is easy, but why? Is it just luck?
Not really luck, more like political physics, inertia. In a hereditary state, the prince just needs to not mess with the old ways too much. Stick to the customs of the ancestors. Be reasonably prudent dealing with things that pop up.
Because the system is already accepted. People are used to it.
Precisely. The rule is old, it's familiar. The reasons people might want change, the memories of upheaval, they've faded over time. So the hereditary prince doesn't need to offend people as much. There's less cause.
Right. The structure itself provides stability. He mentions the Duke of Ferrara holding off a tax from Venice and the Pope, not because he was necessarily a genius, but because his family was just established. It's the power of the status quo.
Exactly. The real trouble starts with the new, or mixed principality. And here we get the first big insight into, let's call it political psychology. The inherent instability comes because, and this is key, men willingly change rulers hoping to better themselves.
The grass is greener. Affected politics. But it's a trap, right?
A fatal trap. They're almost always deceived, he says. They often find they've actually gone from bad to worse. Because the new prince, he's stuck in this impossible bind from day one.
How so? What's the bind?
Well, think about it. To get power, he had to injure the old regime, the people loyal to it. So, boom, instant enemies. But, and this is the kicker, he cannot satisfy the people who helped him get power.
Because they expect too much.
Way too much. They want huge rewards, new jobs, land, influence. And when the prince can't deliver because he can't possibly give everyone everything they want, those initial supporters, they become disillusioned, maybe even become opponents themselves very quickly.
So you've ticked off your enemies and disappointed your friends. You're fighting the past and the present expectations, all while dealing with the usual disruption of a new government home. Soldiers everywhere, new taxes, shaking things up.
It's a nightmare scenario. Look at Louis XII in Milan. He loses it fast the first time.
Why?
The people who opened the gates for him were disappointed. Their hopes weren't met. His rule brought burdens, so they kicked him out.
And getting it back was much harder.
Much harder. It required way more force, more severity. It just highlights the huge cost of that initial failure, that initial disappointment. You burn that goodwill early, and you pay for it later.
So the text almost frames that necessary crackdown after a rebellion, not as a moral failing, but as a strategic necessity. Use the crisis to consolidate.
Pretty much. Punish the ringleaders, fix the weaknesses, secure your position.
Yeah.
It's about using the moment, however harsh it seems.
Okay, so how do you hold on to these difficult new states, especially if they're different from your home turf?
Well, if the new place is culturally similar, same language, same customs, it's relatively simple. Step 1, extinguish the old ruling family completely. Make sure there's no figurehead for revolt. Step 2, crucially, do not change the laws or taxes if you can possibly avoid it.
Keep things familiar, like Brittany or Burgundy becoming part of France, minimal disruption.
Right, but if the new state is different language, laws, customs are all alien, then you need, as he puts it, good fortune and great energy. It's a whole different ballgame.
And he recommends 2 main strategies here. What's the first one?
The best course, if possible, is residence. The prince has to physically move there, live there, like the Ottoman Sultan ruling Greece from Constantinople.
Why is being physically present so important?
Several reasons. 1, you spot trouble immediately before it festers and grows. 2, it stops your own officials from running wild and exploiting the locals, which causes huge resentment. 3, the subjects feel they have direct access to you, which breeds loyalty, or at least makes them very aware of your power and quick to obey. It cuts out the middleman.
Okay, residents. What if that's not practical? What's the second best option?
This one's more ruthless, but seen as more cost-effective. Send colonies, instead of maintaining huge, expensive armies of occupation.
Why colonies over garrisons? Armies seem more direct.
Garrisons are incredibly burdensome. Soldiers need housing, food, supplies. They disrupt daily life for everyone and make the whole state resentful. They cost a fortune. Colonies, on the other hand, only directly injure a small minority, the people whose land and homes you take to give to the colonists.
And the logic there is brutal.
It is. The text points out that those few who are injured are left poor and scattered. They can't organize, they can't fight back effectively. Meanwhile, everyone else is unharmed and theoretically kept quiet by the fear of suffering the same fate. It's a cold calculation.
You concentrate the pain on a group that can't hit back.
Precisely. And this whole discussion, the difficulties of new states, residence colonies, it leads directly to one of the most famous and most chilling axioms in the entire work. It's about how you treat those you've had to injure to get or keep power.
Okay, what's the rule?
The bottom line is stark. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed. There's no safe middle ground. Meaning, small injuries are actually more dangerous than big ones. A minor offense, a slight tax hike, a confiscated good, a public humiliation, it leaves the person resentful, angry, and capable of seeking revenge later.
But a devastating injury.
If you have to hurt someone to secure your position, the injury must be so severe, so total, that they cannot possibly retaliate. You remove their capacity for revenge. Any injury short of that just creates an enemy you now have to constantly watch.
So half measures, light punishments are strategically foolish. They just breed future trouble.
Exactly. Incomplete mercy isn't virtuous, it's a liability. The only safe options are total generosity, winning them over completely, or total destruction, removing the threat. It's pure political risk management, stripped of emotion.
Okay, so if that's how you manage things inside the state, what about external strategy? Dealing with neighbors, potential threats.
Here, the text shifts focus and holds up the ancient Romans as the absolute gold standard. They embodied prudent statecraft, especially this idea of foresight.
Anticipating problems before they happen. What specific things did the Romans do that showed this foresight, according to the text?
3 main things when dealing with, say, a newly acquired province or sphere of influence. First, they sent colonies. We just talked about that. Second, they deliberately kept the smaller, weaker powers in the region friendly, but crucially, without letting them get any stronger. Keep them as dependent allies.
Okay, cultivate the little guys. What was the third thing?
They systematically humbled the major powers in the area. They actively worked to prevent any strong foreign influence from gaining a foothold near their interests. Don't let potential rivals grow unchecked.
It sounds like proactive defense, preventing threats from emerging in the first place.
Exactly. And this connects to that analogy the text uses. State problems are like certain diseases, like hectic fever, he says.
How does that work?
In the early stages, the disease is hard to spot, but easy to cure. If you wait until it's obvious, easy to diagnose, it's often too late to treat effectively. Politics is the same. A wise ruler has to see potential troubles far off and deal with them then, not wait until they're full-blown crises.
So foresight is like preventative medicine for the state.
Perfectly put. The Romans understood this. They knew that war sometimes isn't avoidable, it's just postponed, and often postponed to the other side's advantage if you wait too long.
Right. The example given is fighting Philip and Antiochus in Greece, rather than waiting for them to potentially invade Italy. Better to fight on your terms, further away.
They didn't buy into that idea of just enjoying the present and hoping for the best. They relied on their own foresight and their own virtue, their ability to shape events.
Okay, so the Romans are the model. Who's the counterexample? The one who did everything wrong.
King Louis XII of France, during his campaigns in Italy. His actions are presented as basically a checklist of what not to do if you want to hold on to a complex foreign state.
All right, let's break down his mistakes. There were 5 main ones listed. What was the first?
First, he destroyed the minor powers in Italy. These were the smaller states who should have been his natural allies because they also feared the big players like Venice or the Pope. He basically wiped out his own buffer zone.
Okay, error 1. Kill your potential friends. What's 2?
Second, he actually increased the power of a major power already in Italy, the Church, specifically Pope Alexander VI, Cesare Borgia's father. He helped the Pope conquer the Romagna region.
Strengthening a rival, not smart. Third error.
Third, he brought another powerful foreign force into Italy, Spain. He agreed to split the Kingdom of Naples with the Spanish king. This was just inviting a major competitor right into the heart of the place he was trying to control. And it gave anyone unhappy with French rule another powerful option to turn to.
So eliminate minor allies, strengthen one major rival, invite another major rival in. What else?
Fourth, he didn't follow the advice about residence. He didn't move there himself, didn't establish a personal presence.
And fifth,
he didn't send colonies. He relied on those expensive, unreliable garrisons instead. He basically did the exact opposite of the Roman model on almost every point.
it's almost a perfect storm of bad strategy. He weakened his own position while strengthening everyone who might oppose him.
Yeah. By making the church stronger and bringing in Spain, he created these huge power blocks that were naturally going to be suspicious of him and eventually push him out, which they did.
And this leads to another one of those general rules, doesn't it? Derived from Louis's failure.
The really crucial one. He who is the cause of another becoming powerful is ruined. Simple as that.
Why? Why is helping someone else get strong always self-destructive?
Because the person or state you just helped empower will always distrust you. They'll be suspicious of the very skill, astuteness, or force you use to help them, figuring you could just as easily use it against them later. Or they'll simply see you as a rival now that they're strong. Gratitude doesn't last long in power politics.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, to really understand holding territory, they text contrasts 2 very different ways states were governed back then. The Ottoman Empire, the Turk, versus France. This isn't just about geography, right? It's about the structure of power.
Exactly. It's centralized versus decentralized power. The Turk, the Sultan, or think of Darius in ancient Persia, rules with a prince at the top, and everyone else is basically a servant, a minister appointed purely by his favor.
No independent nobles, no inherited titles with their own power bases.
None, or very few, with real clout. Everyone owes their position directly to the Sultan. This makes the state incredibly hard to conquer from the outside. Why? Because the ministers are loyal only to the Sultan, hard to bribe or turn, and the general population has no local lords to rally around if an invader comes. They're used to obeying the central authority.
Okay, hard to break into. But what happens if you do manage to conquer it?
Then it's surprisingly easy to hold. Once you defeat the main army and, crucially, eliminate the Sultan's entire family, there is no one left with the legitimacy or the independent power base to lead a rebellion.
Like Alexander the Great, holding Darius's empire. Once the head was cut off, the body didn't resist much.
Pretty much. The structure of servitude meant people just transferred their obedience to the new central power. No competing loyalties.
Now, contrast that with France. How was it different?
France was governed by the king, yes, but also by a powerful class of barons. These nobles didn't get their power just from the king's favor. They held titles and lands based on ancient lineage, antiquity of blood, and they had their own subjects, people in their regions who were loyal to them.
So power was much more spread out, more diffuse.
Absolutely. And this structure makes France, or states like it, relatively easy to invade or seize initially.
How so?
An invader just needs to find 1 or 2 disgruntled barons, and there are always some, and win them over, promise them more power or land. That gives the invader a foothold, local allies.
But holding it afterwards.
Is incredibly difficult because even if you defeat the king and the barons who supported him, all the other barons are still there. They still have their lands, their subjects, their local power, and they can easily become leaders of new rebellions against you, the conqueror. You've inherited a system designed for internal conflict and resistance to central control.
So conquering the Turk is like trying to smash a single solid wall. Conquering France is like trying to grab hold of water. It slips through your fingers, and new centers of resistance keep popping up.
That's a good way to put it. The Romans find this out the hard way in places like Spain and France. It took them generations to finally break the power of those local aristocracies and establish centralized Roman rule. It all comes back to eliminating those secondary power bases if you want real lasting control.
Okay, let's shift from the type of state to the person trying to get power. How does a new prince actually succeed? The text makes a big distinction between relying on your own skill ability, or virtue, versus just getting lucky, relying on fortune.
Yeah, this is central. And the core idea is pretty clear. Those rulers who depend least on luck, on fortune, are the ones who build the strongest, most lasting states. They have a much easier time holding on to what they gain.
And the examples given are like the biggest names imaginable: Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus, founders of nations or religions. What did they actually owe to fortune? According to the text, was it nothing?
Almost nothing. Fortune, he says, only gave them the opportunity, the raw material. Moses found the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. Cyrus found the Persians unhappy with Median rule. The opportunity was there, yes, but it was their ability, their virtue, that recognized the moment and shaped that raw material into something new. They were innovators who used immense personal capacity, skill, and foresight.
But being an innovator, trying to introduce something completely new, a new religion, a new form of government that's described as incredibly dangerous, right? The most perilous to conduct and uncertain in its success.
It's back to that psychology again. The innovator automatically makes enemies of everyone who benefited from the old system. They have a vested interest in seeing you fail. But the people who might benefit from the new system, there are only lukewarm defenders.
Lukewarm? Why lukewarm? If they stand to gain.
Because, as the text puts it, men are naturally skeptical. They don't really believe in new things until they've seen them work, until they have solid experience of the benefits. So the opposition is fierce and immediate, while the support is hesitant and conditional. It's a really unstable position to be in.
And this instability, this inherent difficulty of innovation, leads directly to that famous, maybe infamous, point about force.
Yes, the thesis of force. The innovator has to ask, can they rely on persuasion alone, on prayers, or do they need to be able to use force?
And the conclusion is?
Absolutely blunt. All armed prophets have conquered, and the unarmed ones have been destroyed.
Wow. So ideas aren't enough. You need muscle to back them up.
That's the argument. Look at Savonarola in Florence. A powerful preacher, huge influence for a while. But when popular opinion turned against him, when the crowd stopped believing, he had no army, no way to compel obedience to his new order, and he was ruined. Ability, innovation, it needs the backing of force to make people stick with it when faith wavers. Force becomes the guarantor of belief, in a way.
Okay, so that's acquisition by pure ability, virtue. What about the other end of the spectrum? Acquisition by fortune in the arms of others. Getting power through luck or someone else's help.
This path is described as easy to climb, easy to get power initially, but it's the absolute hardest way to stay on top. Why? Because your power rests entirely on two incredibly shaky foundations: the goodwill and the good fortune of whoever put you there. And those things are most inconstant and unstable.
So the person who gets power this way usually lacks something crucial.
Usually two things. First, they often lack the knowledge needed to rule effectively because they probably haven't come up through the ranks learning the ropes. They were just suddenly elevated. Second, they almost always lack their own loyal forces, troops who answer only to them. They're dependent.
They need extraordinary ability after they get power just to build the foundations that others build before they rule.
Exactly, which most people in that situation just don't have. But there's one massive detailed case study of someone who did have that ability, even though he got his start entirely through fortune: Cesare Borgia, Duke Valentino.
Right, he got his power because his father happened to be Pope Alexander VI. Pure fortune. But the text holds him up as almost a model student of power consolidation after that lucky break.
Absolutely. His actions are laid out like a masterclass for any new prince who starts off dependent on others. He knew his position was fragile. He depended on unreliable mercenary captains, the Orsini and Colonna families, and on French support, both of which could disappear, especially after his father died.
So he came up with a plan to become independent. A 4-part plan, basically. What was step 1?
First, he needed to weaken those powerful Roman families, the Orsini and Colonna, who commanded the troops he was using. He did this cleverly by luring away their best soldiers, the gentleman adherents, offering them better pay, titles, positions directly under him.
So peeling away their support base. Smart. What was step 2?
Step 2 was waiting for the right moment to eliminate the leaders of these factions entirely. He famously lured the main Orsini and Vitelli chiefs to a meeting at Senigallia, pretending reconciliation, and then had them all seized and killed. Classic Machiavellian move using deception and force decisively.
Ruthless. Okay, rivals weakened or eliminated. Step 3 was about actually governing the territory he'd gained, the Romagna.
Yes, the Romagna was a mess, lawless, chaotic. To bring order quickly and decisively, he appointed a man named Ramiro d'Orco, described as swift and cruel. D'Orco used extreme measures, harsh punishments, and basically terrified the province into submission and peace.
It worked.
It worked brilliantly in terms of establishing order, but it also generated enormous hatred for Ramiro, and by extension, for Borgia's regime. People were pacified, but they were resentful.
Which leads to step 4. This is the really theatrical one, isn't it? The execution of Ramiro d'Orco himself.
The masterstroke of political stagecraft. Borgia knew that Ramiro's necessary cruelty had created dangerous levels of hatred. He needed to distance himself from it while keeping the benefits of the order Ramiro had established.
So what did he do?
He had Ramiro arrested, tried, probably on trumped-up charges, and then publicly executed in the main square. His body was cut in two and left there with a bloody knife and a chopping block.
Why so gruesome? What was the effect?
The text says the spectacle left the people both satisfied and dismayed. Satisfied because the hated figure was punished, dismayed by the sheer brutality of Borgia's power. It brilliantly communicated, that past cruelty, that wasn't really me, that was him, but don't mess with me. He shifted the blame, purged the hatred, kept the stability, and terrified everyone all at once.
Wow. He seemed to have planned for everything, dealing with rivals, securing territory, managing public opinion, even planning for his father's death by trying to control the next papal election. So why did he ultimately fail?
According to the text, it wasn't a failure of ability, but just incredibly bad luck, extraordinary and extreme malignity of fortune. When his father died suddenly, Caesar himself was deathly ill. He couldn't act decisively at the crucial moment.
But he did make one mistake, even with all that planning.
One critical error, yes. He allowed the election of Pope Julius II, a man he knew was an old enemy, someone he had previously injured. He thought new favors might erase old grudges. Big mistake. The text hammers this point. Powerful people never forget old injuries, no matter what benefits you offer later.
Fascinating case. Okay, so we've seen ability, we've seen fortune. What's the third path the power mentioned? Acquisition by wickedness.
Right. The text doesn't shy away from this. It uses examples like Agathocles of Syracuse and Alvarado da Fermo, men who seized power through outright criminal acts, mass murder of citizens, betrayal of friends and allies.
And the verdict on this. Does wickedness work?
It can gain you empire, the text admits, power, territory, control. But, and this is a significant distinction, it can never gain you glory.
What's the difference? Glory meaning?
Glory seems to mean true renown, being ranked among the genuinely great leaders of history. Agathocles, for instance, showed incredible courage and skill rising from nothing. But his methods slaughtering the senators, constant treachery, were so savage, the text says you simply can't place him alongside founders like Moses or Cyrus. His success doesn't earn him honor.
But again, the text isn't really condemning him morally, is it?
Yeah.
It's analyzing the utility of cruelty, even extreme cruelty.
Exactly. It leads to this very practical distinction between cruelty properly used and badly employed severities. It's not about good versus evil, but effective versus ineffective application of force.
Okay, what makes cruelty properly used?
Two key things. First, it must be applied all at once at the beginning to secure your position. Get the necessary nasty business over with quickly. Second, you must not keep doing it. The initial shock secures the state, and then you must stop, unless the cruelty can somehow be turned to the benefit of the subjects later on.
So do it fast, do it decisively, and then stop.
Right. The axiom here is, injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that, being tasted less, they offend less. A single decisive blow is psychologically less damaging in the long run than constant nagging oppression. It allows the prince to then shift gears, offer benefits, reassure people, and let the state settle down. Think Agathocles securing Syracuse with one massacre, then ruling effectively afterward.
Okay, badly employed severities.
These are the cruelties that grow over time instead of decreasing. The prince finds he has to keep resorting to force, making things worse and worse. He has to, as the text graphically puts it, keep the knife in his hand.
And the consequence of that.
Constant fear and instability. The subjects can never feel secure, never attach themselves to the prince. If you have to keep applying force, it means your initial actions weren't decisive enough. Or you've created a situation where only fear holds the state together, which is inherently fragile.
So the timing and concentration of cruelty are everything. And benefits.
Benefits, conversely, should be given out little by little so the flavor may last longer. Small, consistent rewards build goodwill more effectively than one huge giveaway. It's all about managing perception and psychology through the calculated application of pain and pleasure.
All right, so assuming the prince has navigated the treacherous path to power, whether through skill, luck, or even wickedness, how does he manage the internal dynamics of the state he now rules? We get into the civil principality.
Yeah, this is where a citizen becomes ruler not by conquest or crime, but by the favor of his own people. And it stems from that fundamental conflict you find in pretty much every city or state. The nobles want to dominate and oppress, and the people just want not to be dominated and oppressed.
Two opposing desires. And the prince can come to power supported by either group.
Correct. Either the nobles see him as someone who can help them control the populace, or the people see him as a protector against the nobles. But the text argues very strongly that getting power with the support of the people is much, much better.
Why is the popular route considered structurally superior? Easier to hold on to power that way.
Significantly easier. Several reasons. First, if the people elevate you, the prince finds himself essentially alone, as the text says. He doesn't have a bunch of powerful nobles around him who consider themselves his equals and are therefore hard to command or satisfy. The people just want a fair ruler.
Fewer rivals at the top. What else?
The people's objective, simply not being oppressed, is seen as more honest or righteous, and frankly, easier to satisfy than the noble's desire, which is to oppress. And critically, it's a numbers game.
Back to the numbers.
Always. A prince can never truly secure himself against a hostile population. There are just too many of them. If the people turn against you, you're finished. But hostile nobles, they're relatively few. You can manage or secure yourself against a small group of disgruntled aristocrats.
And hostile nobles are a double threat, right? They don't just abandon you.
Exactly. In times of trouble, they won't just desert you, they'll actively conspire against you. They have the resources, the connections, the ambition to try and overthrow you. The people, if hostile, might just withdraw support or riot. The nobles will plot.
There's an example used here, Nabis of Sparta.
Yeah, Nabis managed to hold off basically all of Greece and a Roman army attacking him. Why? Because internally, he only had to worry about suppressing a few powerful nobles. The text implies that if the Spartan people had been against him too, he wouldn't have stood a chance no matter how good his army was. Internal popular support, or at least neutrality, is vital.
So the big takeaway for how a prince should behave internally seems to be, avoid contempt and hatred. Above all else, what are the specific actions that are guaranteed to make the people hate you?
It boils down to two main things: being rapacious, constantly greedy for wealth, and violating the property and women of your subject.
Property seems key. There's that incredibly stark line.
The one about men forgetting the death of their fathers sooner than the loss of their patrimony. Yes. It's brutal, but it highlights how fundamental property rights are to civic peace and stability in this view. Don't mess with people's stuff, and don't mess with their families. That breeds deep, lasting hatred.
Okay, so that's hatred. What about contempt? What makes a prince seem contemptible, weak?
Being seen as fickle, indecisive, frivolous, effeminate, cowardly, mean-spirited, basically lacking gravitas and strength. The prince must project the opposite: greatness, courage, seriousness, fortitude. His decisions, especially judicial ones, need to seem firm, irrevocable. Nobody should think they can easily manipulate or deceive him.
Hatred comes from predatory actions. Contempt comes from perceived weakness of character.
Well put. And this links directly to security against internal threats, particularly conspiracies. What's the best defense against plots?
According to this, it's simple. Just don't be hated by the majority of people.
Exactly. Conspiracies are risky business for the plotters anyway. They have to trust fellow malcontents who might easily betray them for a reward. But the absolute killer for any conspiracy is popular goodwill towards the prince.
Why?
Because the conspirator usually hopes to please the people by removing the ruler. If the people actually like the prince, or at least don't hate him, the conspirator knows that killing him won't bring popular acclaim, it might bring popular fury down on them. They lose their justification and face danger from all sides. The example of the Bentivoglio family in Bologna shows how popular support could protect a ruling family even after assassins killed its leaders.
Okay, so popular support is the ultimate shield. What about specific internal policies? Like, should the prince arm his subjects or build fortresses?
On arming subjects, the advice for a new prince taking over his own state is clear. Yes, absolutely arm them. It turns suspicious people into loyalists and makes loyalists feel secure. Disarming your own core population just breeds resentment. It signals you distrust them or you're a coward.
But what if you conquer a new territory?
Then you do the opposite. You must disarm the newly conquered populace, except for those few who actively helped you during the conquest. They become your trusted local militia, while the rest are rendered harmless.
Makes sense. And what about internal divisions, factions, like the Guelphs and Ghibellines in Italy? Should a prince encourage those? Keep them divided to rule them?
The text sees that as a sign of weakness, actually. Maybe in peacetime, exploiting divisions could be a tactic, but in times of war or crisis, a divided city or state is quickly lost. The enemy can exploit those divisions. Unity, even if it feels a bit forced, is essential for survival when things get tough.
Okay, no fostering factions. Lastly, fortresses. Build them or not. Good idea, bad idea.
It depends on the circumstances. The rule of thumb given is, if the prince fears his own people more than he fears foreign invaders, then yes, build fortresses to protect yourself from your subjects.
But if the people are generally supportive,
Then fortresses might be unnecessary or even counterproductive, and the text delivers the final verdict on this pretty clearly. The best possible fortress is not to be hated by the people.
back to popular support again.
Always, because even the strongest fortress won't save you if your people despise you so much that they ally with foreign attackers to get rid of you. If the people are against you, no wall is high enough.
Okay, we've talked about the internal balancing act, people, nobles, hatred, contempt. If that's the software of the state, now we need to talk about the hardware, military power.
And this is presented as absolutely fundamental. The text states very clearly that the chief foundations of any state, new or old, are good laws and good arms.
And crucially, the two are linked.
Inseparably linked. You can't have good laws, stable governance, without good arms to enforce them and defend the state. Good arms are the prerequisite for good laws to even function.
So if military strength is foundational, the text immediately warns against relying on certain types of military forces, specifically mercenaries and auxiliaries. Why are these seen as so bad? Let's start with mercenaries, hired soldiers.
They're described as basically useless and dangerous. Why? Because their only motivation is pay, which is never enough, the text argues, to make them willing to actually die for you. They have no loyalty, no real discipline. They're ambitious for their own gain, not yours.
So they're unreliable in peace and cowardly in war.
Pretty much. Italy's political weakness and vulnerability to foreign invasion at the time is blamed squarely on its long-term reliance on mercenary captains, the condottieri. These captains, if they were competent, inevitably pursued their own power, sometimes even turning against their employers. If they were incompetent, well, you just lost the war.
Only rulers commanding their own citizen soldiers like Rome or Sparta achieved lasting stability and freedom.
That's the model presented. Arm your own people. Now, auxiliaries, these are troops borrowed from a powerful neighboring ruler, are presented as even worse than mercenaries, which sounds odd at first. Why worse?
Yeah, wouldn't trained troops from an ally be better than unreliable mercenaries?
More dangerous, the text argues, because auxiliary troops are usually well-trained, disciplined, and united. But they are united under the command of another prince, their own master.
So the danger isn't incompetence, it's competence loyal to someone else.
Exactly. If the auxiliaries lose a battle fighting for you, well, you're defeated along with them. But the real paradox is, if they win, you become their prisoner. You've just invited a powerful, unified foreign army into your state, and now you're completely dependent on their leader. They can easily decide to just stay and take over.
Like Pope Julius II using Spanish troops against Ferrara. He won, but he basically put himself in the pocket of the King of Spain.
A huge risk. A victory won with someone else's army isn't a real victory for you. You're just swapping one master for another, potentially. So the core message is crystal clear. A wise prince must rely on his own forces. Subjects, citizens, dependents, people loyal directly to him.
Better to lose with your own troops than win with someone else's.
That's the stark conclusion. Because a loss with your own can be rebuilt, a win with auxiliaries can mean the end of your independence. César Borges' career path is used again as the example.
How so?
He started with French auxiliaries, realized they were unreliable, switched to mercenaries, the Orsini Vitelli, realized they were treacherous. His power and reputation only became solid when he finally got rid of both and raised his own loyal troops from the Romagna. He stood on his own feet, the lesson. Nothing is so uncertain or unstable as fame or power not founded on its own strength.
Okay, so having your own strong military is paramount. This leads to the idea that the prince really only has one job.
The art of war. That's it. A prince should have no other focus, no other study, no other profession than war, its rules, and its discipline. This is the only art that truly belongs to someone who rules.
And neglecting it
Leads to ruin. First, it causes the prince to be despised, that contempt we talked about. If you don't understand military matters, you lose respect, especially from soldiers. And ultimately, it leads to losing your state. Francesco Sforza became Duke of Milan because he was a great soldier. His sons, who avoided military life, lost the dukedom.
So this isn't just a wartime activity. The prince needs to be training constantly, even in peace. How?
2 ways, physically and intellectually. The physical part involves keeping his troops well organized and trained, yes, but also the prince himself needs to be active. The text puts huge emphasis on hunting.
Hunting. Why hunting?
For several reasons. It keeps the body tough, accustomed to hardship. But more importantly, it teaches the prince the landscape. You learn how hills rise, how valleys open out, how rivers flow, where swamps are. This intimate geographical knowledge is absolutely vital for defense, for choosing campsites, for leading armies effectively, for planning sieges. Know your terrain.
Like Philopoemen, the Greek leader, who was supposedly always thinking about military tactics, even when just out for a walk.
Exactly, constantly analyzing the ground. If the enemy were on that hill and we were here, who would have the advantage? How could we retreat? How would they advance? Turning every landscape into a tactical exercise.
And the intellectual training.
Reading history, studying the campaigns and actions of great military leaders from the past. Figure out why they won, why others lost. Avoid the mistakes. Imitate the successes.
Find role models.
Yes. Alexander imitated Achilles. Caesar imitated Alexander. Scipio imitated Cyrus. Find a great model and emulate their best qualities and strategies. The idea is to constantly build up your knowledge and preparedness, even in peacetime, so that when fortune does turn against you, and it probably will, you're ready. You've built the dikes before the flood arrives.
All right, now we get to the part that really shook things up. The section that arguably gave Machiavellian its modern meaning. The explicit moral departure.
This is where the text says, look, we need to deal with the real truth of a matter rather than the imagination of it. Forget idealized notions of how princes should behave. To survive, to hold on to his state, the prince must learn how to do wrong and to make use of it or not according to necessity.
That's the core break, isn't it? Practical reality demands a willingness to act immorally if the situation requires it for the state's survival.
Yes. It's not about being evil for its own sake. It's about prudence. The prince should avoid vices that would obviously lose him his state if he can. But he shouldn't hesitate to embrace actions typically seen as vices if they are absolutely necessary to preserve power.
Okay, let's look at the specific examples. First, this paradox of liberality versus meanness. Generosity is a virtue we admire, but the text argues strongly against a prince trying to be seen as overly generous. Why?
Because to maintain a reputation for liberality, a prince has to spend lavishly, constantly giving gifts, throwing feasts, funding huge projects. Where does that money come from? Eventually, he has to heavily tax his own people.
Which leads to
poverty for the state, being despised by the overburdened populace, and ultimately hatred. Trying to be liberal bankrupts you and makes your people hate you. So paradoxically, it's wiser for a prince to accept being called mean or thrifty.
Why is being mean strategically better? That feels so wrong.
Because being thrifty only earns you, maybe, a bit of reproach without hatred. People might grumble that you're tight-fisted, but they don't hate you for it the way they hate being crushed by taxes. And crucially, economy allows the prince to live within his means, to fund his armies for defense without having to constantly squeeze his subjects.
So thriftiness actually enables true generosity later. By not taking from the many, you can afford defense and occasional necessary spending.
Exactly. You practice liberality towards the vast majority you don't tax excessively, and meanness only towards the few you don't give lavish gifts to. Since avoiding hatred and contempt is the absolute priority, and excessive liberality leads directly to both, calculated meanness becomes the safer, more prudent governing vice.
Okay, that's counterintuitive, but is a harsh logic. What about the most famous one? Loved versus feared.
The classic dilemma. Ideally, the text concedes a prince would want to be both loved and feared, but since it's very difficult to combine the two,
If you have to choose.
it is much safer to be feared than loved.
Why? What's the reasoning?
It comes down to a deeply pessimistic view of human nature. Men, the text states, are fundamentally ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous. Love is maintained by a link of obligation, a feeling which men, being self-interested, will break whenever it suits them.
But fear.
Fear is maintained by a dread of punishment which never fails. Fear is a constant. It's something the prince controls directly through the threat of consequences. Love is dependent on the changeable feelings of the subjects. Fear is dependent on the prince's power to inflict pain. Therefore, fear is the more reliable tool for control.
But isn't there a danger of fear turning into that hatred you're supposed to avoid?
Absolutely. Crucial point, yes. The fear must be managed very carefully. The prince must inspire fear in such a way that if he cannot win love, he at least avoids hatred.
How do you draw that line? Fear without hatred.
The key is to abstain from the property of his citizens and subjects, and from their women. Don't be a predator. If you absolutely must execute someone, make sure there's a clear justification and a manifest cause. But never, ever confiscate property without extreme cause. Remember, men forget their father's death sooner than the loss of their inheritance. Fear the authority? Yes. Hate the ruler as a thief? No.
So be feared for your power, not hated for your rapacity.
Exactly. Now, this calculation changes slightly when dealing with an army.
How so? Is cruelty okay there?
Not just okay, but often necessary. To keep a large, diverse army united, disciplined, and ready for action, a reputation for cruelty can actually be essential.
Hannibal is the example, right?
Yes. Hannibal commanded a huge army made up of many different nationalities in foreign lands for years without any significant dissent or mutiny. This is attributed to his inhuman cruelty, which, combined with his incredible military skill, virtue, made him both revered and terrifying to his soldiers. It kept them in line.
And the counterexample is Scipio.
Scipio Africanus, the Roman general. He was seen as too lenient, too easygoing with his troops in Spain. His excessive forbearance, the text calls it, led to indiscipline and mutiny that almost cost Rome dearly. The lesson. In the specific context of military command, where absolute obedience is vital, severity is often a more effective management tool than leniency.
Okay, this acceptance of necessary evils brings us to keeping faith. Promises, treaties, oaths. Should a prince keep his word?
Well, the text uses that famous analogy of the fox and the lion. A prince needs to understand both natures.
Why both?
Because there are two ways to contest power, by law, which is proper to man, and by force, which is proper to beasts. Since law is often not enough, a prince must know how to use the beastly nature too. He needs to be like the centaur, half man, half beast.
And the fox and lion represent.
The lion can frighten off the wolves, use force, appear powerful, but the lion is not very clever. He doesn't see traps. The fox is clever. She recognizes traps and snares. But the fox isn't strong enough to frighten the wolves.
So the prince needs to be strong like the lion and cunning like the fox.
Precisely. Relying only on force, being just a lion, will make you vulnerable to deception. Relying only on cunning without strength is also weak. You need both.
And how does this relate to keeping promises?
Since men are inherently bad and will not keep their promises to the prince if it doesn't suit them, a wise prince cannot and should not keep faith when keeping it would be disadvantageous to him, or when the reasons that made him promise in the first place no longer exist.
Basically, if others are going to break their word to you, you're a fool to keep your word to them if it hurts you.
That's the logic. The political world is treacherous. You have to be prepared to be treacherous too for survival. The prince must be a great pretender and dissembler.
A good liar, essentially.
And a good actor. Because, as the text says, men are generally simple and focused on immediate appearances. He who seeks to deceive will always find someone who allows himself to be deceived. Pope Alexander VI is held up again as someone who mastered the art of appearing trustworthy while constantly breaking his word.
This leads to that really striking point about appearing virtuous versus being virtuous.
Yes. It's not necessary for a prince to actually possess all the good qualities. mercy, faithfulness, humanity, uprightness, religiousness, but it is absolutely necessary to appear to possess them.
Appearances are more important than reality.
In terms of maintaining power, often yes. The prince needs to seem merciful, faithful, religious, etc. in his public pronouncements and actions. But privately, his mind must be flexible enough to turn himself to the contrary, if necessity dictates. He might have to act cruelly, break faith, act against charity or religion to save the state.
But always maintain the facade.
Always maintain the facade. His words, especially, should always sound full of those 5 qualities. Why? Because men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Most people see the surface, the appearance, and they judge by the results of your actions. If you succeed in preserving the state, the means will usually be judged honorable by the masses, the vulgar, who are easily impressed by appearances and outcomes.
Wow. Okay, let's test this theory. The text looks at the Roman emperors. They had an extra challenge, right? Not just nobles and people, but the soldiers.
A huge complicating factor. The soldiers often had very different desires from the people. Soldiers wanted a warlike, bold, even cruel and greedy leader who would let them plunder and give them high pay. The people usually wanted a peaceful, modest ruler who would ensure stability. Emperors were caught between these conflicting demands.
So how did different emperors fare? Marcus Aurelius.
He succeeded. Why? He was hereditary, universally respected for his virtue, and crucially, he managed to keep both the soldiers and the people within their proper bounds. He was neither hated nor despised. His legitimacy and character carried him through.
But what about good emperors who were new, like Pertinax or Alexander Severus? They tried to be virtuous.
And they failed disastrously. They were murdered by their own soldiers. Why? Because being new, they lacked that inherent authority Marcus had. Their goodness, their modesty, their attempts to curb the soldiers' excesses just made them seem weak, contemptible, especially to the military. The very soldiers they needed to protect them despised their virtues and killed them. Their goodness was their undoing in that context.
So virtue isn't always rewarded. What about the opposite? Severus. He was new, cruel, rapacious, but he succeeded. How?
Severus was brilliant at playing the fox and the lion. He had immense military skill, virtue, which earned the soldiers' admiration. He was ruthless, cleverly deceiving, and eliminating his rivals one by one. He kept the soldiers happy by allowing them license, even though it oppressed the people somewhat.
So his military prowess and cunning protected him.
Yes. His great reputation shielded him from the hatred his actions might otherwise have caused among the people. The soldiers respected his strength and benefited from his rule, so they supported him. The lesson drawn is that a new prince, especially one facing powerful factions like the Roman army, needs to imitate Severus's cunning and force initially to secure his position, but then, once stable, should perhaps try to emulate Marcus's justice and moderation to maintain it honorably. Take the necessary parts from the bad example and the glorious parts from the good one. Okay, nearly there. 2 final big topics. How a prince should handle advice, his counselors, and that ever-present factor, fortune. First, counsel. How does a prince choose good advisors?
It's seen as a reflection of the prince's own intelligence, isn't it? The quality of the people around him says a lot about him.
Absolutely. The first opinion which one forms of a prince and of his understanding is by observing the men he has around him. So choosing wisely is critical.
What's the key test for a good minister or servant?
The text offers a simple, almost foolproof test. Does the minister think more of the prince's interests or his own? If you see your advisor constantly looking for his own profit in everything he does, always seeking personal gain, he will never be a good, trustworthy servant. Avoid him.
Find someone whose interests align with the state's. And how does the prince keep such a minister loyal and honest once found?
By managing incentives carefully. The prince should honor him, enrich him, share responsibilities, and cares with him. Make the minister feel valued and tied to the prince's success. Give him enough wealth and status that he has a lot to lose if the prince falls.
But not make him too independent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The honors and riches shouldn't make him so powerful he doesn't need the prince. The minister needs to understand clearly that he cannot stand alone. It's a relationship of shared interest, mutual benefit, but also clear dependency of the minister on the prince. That ensures trust and loyalty, theoretically.
Okay, choosing ministers is one thing. What about the universal problem of flattery? Everyone tells the ruler what they think he wants to hear. How does a prince get honest advice?
This is tricky. The text acknowledges that flattery is like a plague, but there's also a danger in the opposite extreme. If you let everyone speak their mind freely about anything, you risk losing respect and authority. People might become too familiar, too critical.
So what's the middle path? The recommended strategy?
Selective honesty. The prince should choose a small group of genuinely wise men, and he should give only them the liberty to speak the truth to him, but crucially only when he asks them about specific matters, not unsolicited advice on everything.
So control the flow, but encourage honesty within those limits.
Yes. The prince must be a great asker of questions, constantly inquiring, listening patiently to their honest opinions on the matters he raises. He should hear everyone in his council, consider all viewpoints, but then he must make his own decision and stick to it firmly. He shouldn't be swayed back and forth.
And the quality of the council depends ultimately on the prince himself.
Absolutely. A prince who isn't wise himself will never be able to recognize or take good advice consistently, unless he completely delegates decision-making to one single, very prudent advisor. But the text warns that advisor would likely end up taking the state from the prince eventually. Bottom line, good counsels, from wherever they come, are born of the wisdom of the prince and not the wisdom of the prince from good counsels. The book stops with the ruler's own judgment.
Okay, last rager theme, fortune and free will. How much control does a ruler or anyone actually have over events? Is it all just luck and fate?
The text tackles this head-on. It acknowledges the view that maybe everything is predetermined by fortune or God, making human effort pointless. But it strongly rejects that level of fatalism.
It argues we have some control.
Yes. The estimate given is that fortune is the arbiter of perhaps one half of our actions, but she leaves the other half, or maybe a little less, for us to direct. There is scope for human agency, for virtue, for foresight and action to shape outcomes.
And this is where the famous river analogy comes in.
Exactly. Fortune is compared to a raging, destructive river in flood. When it's flooding, yes, you're pretty helpless against its immediate power, but that doesn't mean you do nothing.
What should you do?
In times of calm weather, when the river is low, prudent men must build defenses, dikes, barriers, channels to prepare for the next flood, so that when the waters do rise again, their force is channeled, mitigated, less destructive.
So preparation can manage fortune's impact even if it can't eliminate it.
Precisely. Fortune shows her real power, her destructive potential, where no virtue, no preparation has been made to resist her. Italy, the text laments, is like an open field without dikes or banks, completely exposed to the floods of foreign invasion, unlike prepared nations like Germany, Spain, or France. Preparation is key.
And success, then, depends on matching your actions to the times.
Yes, adapting your approach according to the spirit of the times. A prince might succeed for a while because his natural way of acting, say, being cautious, happens to fit the circumstances. But if the times change and demand boldness, that same cautious prince, unable to change his nature, will fail.
This sounds like a huge challenge. Can people really change their fundamental approach like that?
The text is actually quite pessimistic about this. It's incredibly hard for people to deviate from their natural inclination or from a method that has brought them success in the past. The cautious man struggles to become impetuous when needed, and vice versa. They're often ruined because their character becomes misaligned with what the times demand.
Pope Julius II again. He's the example of someone whose nature did fit the times.
Yes, he acted with tremendous energy and impetuosity in everything he did. And because the circumstances happened to favor that bold approach at that moment, he was incredibly successful, achieving things a more cautious pope never would have dared. His nature matched the moment.
And this leads to that final, rather startling statement about fortune.
The one comparing fortune to a woman, yes. It concludes that fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill-use her. It argues she yields more readily to the bold, the adventurous, the violent, than to those who proceed cautiously and respectfully. Fortune favors the young and aggressive.
A very provocative image to end the analysis of fortune. Hashtag tag outro. So after all this analysis, acquiring states, managing people, using cruelty, breaking faith, dealing with fortune, the text ends with this powerful call to action, an ultimate exhortation.
Yes, addressed to the Medici family, basically arguing that the time is ripe for a new Italian prince to rise and liberate Italy, which is described as being worse off than the Hebrews enslaved in Egypt, beaten, despoiled, torn, overrun, without head, without order.
And the justification for this potential war of liberation.
It's framed as a just cause. That war is just, which is necessary, and arms are hallowed when there is no other hope but in them. It casts the potential ruler not as an aggressor, but as a necessary redeemer fulfilling a righteous destiny.
But Italy's problem, as diagnosed earlier, was weak leadership and bad armies.
Exactly. Great individual valor in the Italian soldier in the limbs, but failure in the head, in the leadership. Too many petty rulers, unwilling to obey each other, and a disastrous reliance on those useless mercenary and auxiliary forces.
So the only way for this new liberator prince to succeed is
To adopt a new order of arms. To create his own national army composed of loyal Italians. This new force would need innovative tactics designed specifically to overcome the known strengths and weaknesses of the dominant foreign infantries of the time. The Swiss, vulnerable to determined close combat infantry, and the Spanish, vulnerable to cavalry charges.
create a new military virtue for Italy.
Yes. By establishing these new laws, new military structures, backed by his own ability, virtue, the new prince would gain immense reputation, reverence, and admiration, and finally unite and redeem Italy. It's a hopeful, almost messianic conclusion after chapters of brutal realism.
You know, what strikes me wrapping this all up is that relentless focus on proactive preparation, on foresight, on shaping events rather than just reacting, seems to run through everything from managing internal dissent to dealing with fortune.
Absolutely. Whether it's building metaphorical dikes against fortune's floods or eliminating rivals before they become too strong, the core message is about control, anticipation, and the application of virtue to impose order on chaos. It's fundamentally about the power and the necessity of human agency in a dangerous world.
Which leaves us, and you, with maybe a final thought to chew on. If political success truly depends, as the text suggests, on adapting your methods constantly to the spirit of the times, and if human nature makes it so hard for us to change our ingrained character, is long-term political success even possible for one individual? Or is every ruler, every state eventually doomed by the very consistency that defines them when the times inevitably change?